go, whenever you are. Thank you. Good evening, and welcome to the PPD Public School Athletics and Wellness Subcommittee meeting. Today is December 8th, 2020. We're being broadcast live, I believe, on PATV as well as Facebook Live. Tonight, along with subcommittee members Joe Amico, Brandy Carpenter, we have with us Sharon Cameron, the PPD Health Department agent, and Mr. Bob Bua, the athletic director for PPD Public Schools, Dr. Chris Lord, our assistant superintendent. Before we get underway, I do want to wish my friend and colleague Joe Amico a happy birthday. We appreciate you spending your birthday with us, Joe. Tonight, we have two items on our agenda, and if time allows and the subject matter takes us elsewhere, we may take up other matters. Two items on our agenda. We can start off with the practice schedule for non-season sports. So I'm going to ask Mr. Bua if he can please give I'll let Mr. Bua start. I think he had some procedures and protocols that were put into place in expectation of winter sports starting. So maybe that's a good place to start, Mr. Bua.
Yeah, I'd say let's attack winter sports before we start talking about sports that are not in season. So like the fall, I put together a guidelines and kind of protocol procedures that kind of take off the MIAA as well as the EEA guidelines for how to do this kind of successfully. I think we learned a lot from the fall on what we need to kind of do. So this new document kind of follows suit with that. So part of it is just we do have a warning in place that we didn't have necessarily in the fall. So by playing a sport that you are potentially exposing yourself or potentially opening yourself up to contracting COVID-19, and at that point being subject to quarantine, missing games, missing practices, and/or missing your season, depending on what happens. And I think some parents, when that first kind of popped up, I think people were taken by surprise on that a little bit. So there is that kind of aspect that you could miss whatever the amount of time is that is determined by the Board of Health for quarantining when that pops up. So right now from the MIAA, and I don't know what today's announcement from the governor is going to do with what sports are going to be or not going to be allowed, but as it stands right now, basketball, hockey, gymnastics, and swimming have been given green lighted by the MIAA as well as the EEA to proceed forward. Winter track has been pushed to the fall 2 season. So just within the guidelines themselves, I kind of have stuff on having a bag, making sure you have your own equipment, kind of keeping your stuff separate from everybody else's, trying to limit obviously shared equipment, shared water bottles, things like that. Where the fall had kind of lesser guidelines, the winter has a little stronger guidelines with masks, all sports, all masks, all the time, 24/7, 365. Like that's what's kind of in place. Where in the fall, if you played soccer, if you were away from somebody, you could pull your mask down. That doesn't exist anymore. That kind of went out the window. So there's that aspect of it. Our training procedures for the athletic trainer have stayed the same from the fall to the winter. So just within how I kind of have envision things here is using both the facilities here at the Higgins as well as the high school to be able to run practices. And so right now I want to try to limit the exposure and crossovers of teams in cohorts, not cohorts in school, cohorts within the teams. So right now the way I have things set up is each team's going to get a 2-hour practice window during the week. And from that 2-hour window, like varsity and JV will practice, but they'll each get 90 minutes. So each team will have 30 minutes of time where they're alone in the field house to use the full court. Then when they're together, for that hour that they're together, they're each on separate sides of the court. So the JV team is not intermixing with the varsity team and kind of vice versa. So if somebody does get sick on one team, we're not shutting down 30 kids. We're looking at more kind of having to shut down those 10 to 12 kids on that side. So like in the fall, we won't have locker rooms open. The expectation is you come dressed, ready to go. That would be at Yellow Jackets, that would be at the skating rink, that would be at the high school, that would be at the YMCA. So you come dressed, ready to go, kind of on that end. So like we had in the fall, each team every day would have to sign in as I don't have any symptoms. The kind of self-screening for each athlete that would then be collected and turned into the athletic trainer, and then when it comes to how things would look and operate in the field house, I have for games we won't use the chairs. We'll use the small bleachers on the far side of the field house, which I'll have marked off 6-foot X's. And that way kids are spread out both this way as well as kind of making their way up as team benches. On either side of those bleachers, we would kind of rope off as kind of the locker room areas where kids could store their stuff. And then within the EA guidelines as it stands now, that's where kids could go. If you come off the court, you could go to that area to take a mass break. Or if there's a timeout, team moves to that area where everybody could kind of spread out to do your team meeting. Most of the guidelines that for basketball and hockey revolve around social distance. The rules of the game have not been modified too dramatically. I know for basketball they're not going to do like a tip-off to start the game and things like that have been kind of put into play. So most of it is social distance and stuff. And I'll be meeting with the coaches tomorrow and kind of go over a lot of the policies and procedures and making sure they have all that stuff in a row. So my biggest message to them and the biggest thing that I kind of pull out of that is we have to be cautious of preventing those groups from crossing over. So even the time within the field house between practices, there's enough time for one team to come out and another team to come in. And the expectation is you're not coming fit, you're not showing up 2 hours early for a practice. You're 15 minutes before your practice. We ain't letting you in until it's 15 minutes prior to your practice. So, it's not going to be practice is at 3:30, I'm dropping you off at 2:45 and you're going to sit around for 45 minutes, So a lot of that's the kind of stuff that I have in place. And the big thing, and I know I met with Sharon last week, is I think in order to do winter sports and to start off and do it right and do it safely, at this point, part of my recommendation would be not to have fans at all at games. I know right now the skating rink is not going to allow it. The YMCA is not going to allow it. Yellow Jackets is not going to allow it for gymnastics. And I just think it would create a strain on resources as well as kind of getting all three levels in and being able to do it safely and being able to do it to be able to meet the cleaning guidelines and everything else. It's not like we would be the only school in the state that wouldn't allow in fans. I know I know the Merrimack Valley as a league is not doing it. I know most of the Western state districts aren't doing it. I can't speak for everybody, but I know there's some of the Cal schools are not doing it as well. So it's just kind of one of those aspects. My recommendation would be, at a minimum, let's start the season, get it up and running before we start talking about fans coming in. And I know with the governor's announcement today, the number of fans we would be able to bring in too would be significantly altered as well. So that would be, and I have reached out to PATV about trying to cover as many games that they can cover in some form or another. So we would be trying to live stream as many games for both hockey and basketball that we can get streams from them. And then for the out of season teams.
Well, let's hold off there.
Sure.
I just want to give Mr. Miko and Ms. Carpenter an opportunity to ask you any questions if they have any or make any statements or comments. Ms. Carpenter?
Thank you. Mr. Bua, thank you for coming here. I know it's a huge undertaking, organizing, the next season of sports. You've had a little bit of experience with the fall, so I do appreciate all of the information that you've provided to us. The no spectators at the games. I know this is going to be a huge topic. Parents are already reaching out because it must have gotten out somehow that this was already a possibility. I just have to ask, for the gymnastics at the Yellow Jackets, the YMCA, and the hockey rink, those are not our buildings. Is it those businesses that have refused to have the spectators, or is this our recommendation? Is it
that's coming from those facilities themselves.
From those facilities, they're
Yes.
saying you can still participate in your sport, but we don't want to allow.
Fans, correct.
Okay. And do we pay these facilities to?
So yes, we do. We do rent those facilities out, yes.
Okay, so, I do have a little bit of an issue of the no spectators. I realize that numbers are changing, and I'm gonna kind of hold off on this a little bit until we hear from Ms. Cameron, but that is one of the things that I think might be a little difficult, because it is, it is working. Our other sports were having spectators, so I would like to kind of like listen a little bit more about this and maybe hear what Ms. Cameron has to say, but we can't guarantee that PATV will be at all of these events.
Correct.
So, even just one, like the field house, the Peabody High field house is pretty big, to have at least the one parent coming in for a basketball game.
Yeah, and what it becomes is, yes, we did it in the fall. The difference is we were outdoors in the fall versus kind of being indoors in the fall. And, we have, what we can allow in is already tight as it is with teams and coaches and game staff, and now you're adding another element to all of that. So if we were to have games, we would have to rope off this section of bleachers can only be used for the freshman game, and then shut that down, and then say this section can only be used for the JV game, and shut that down, and then have to clean in between to then open it up for the varsity game. It would create a backjam in being able to kind of, because then it would be, once the freshman game, we'd have to stop and clear the gym out, and then it would have to be then stopping people from coming in too early, and it would just, I think the logistics of it, and then again, the more people you bring in, we're not letting parents in for parent-teacher conferences, yet we're going to let them in for sporting events. And I think starting the season, and let's see how it goes before we start adding just another element to it, because it is about getting the kids the opportunities to play and about the kids and giving them the opportunity. And I get it. I'm a parent. I want to watch my kids participate. I fully understand that. But also I'm looking at it, how can we do it safely and make sure that the kids stay safe? Because that's a classroom during the day. The field house is not just a basketball facility. It's a classroom during the day. And again, the more we bring in, the more we open up ourselves to potential.
Right. No,
exposure.
and I totally understand and respect that. I'm just looking at some of the other ways that these facilities have already accommodated those type of things.
Right.
That they've already been, it's already been happening in these places where they're letting spectators and different people in. I feel like those things are going to be changing soon, which is why I'm kind of holding off to kind of listen a little bit more.
Yeah.
But places like the hockey rink and the Y, they've already established those protocols on how to let people in. So I think I just want to let this meeting proceed a little bit further and then maybe touch back on this as more information comes in. But it is definitely something that's out there that people are concerned with. And if it even came down to it, if it's a matter of, you have the freshman team or the JV team, really like the senior parents are going to be the ones who will never be able to watch that again. Or, does the hockey rink have live barn? That would loosen up PATV to accommodate the basketball games, just so they can watch.
Yeah. Not at the moment, but I know,
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I do, and I know Yellow Jackets does have that ability to, talking to them, they have that ability to do some type of streaming as well there, so it's,
Yeah.
And again, it's I'm not opposed to having parents come in, I would rather start the seasons, see how it's going, see what the numbers are like, because I'd rather see the kids play than let's have parents come in and then all of a sudden we have to shut everything down because we're letting parents in. But I'd rather let's get it up, let's get it running, let's see how it goes, and then let's have that discussion again in the end of January going into February. Let's get through the first few weeks of games and have that discussion. That would be my recommendation.
How far does the season go? We're backed up by what, like 2 weeks?
So we would start practices or tryouts would start on December 14th. First set of games would not start until January 8th, the weekend of the 8th and the 9th. And the season runs till February 21st.
February 21st we're going to. Okay. I'm going to yield for now just because I think Mr. Amico might have something I just want to hear a little bit more. Thank you.
Mr. Amico?
Great, thank you through the chair, Mr. Bob. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all your hard work this year and into this winter season and spring and beyond. Ms. Carpenter, you bring incredible points. I can't, I was having a discussion the other day with a colleague of mine, and I can't even imagine as a student athlete missing my senior year in high school, or getting backed up or having all these restrictions. It's such a special time of for these kids. I know it was for me. It was my decision on where to go to college next. And I was lucky enough to play college basketball at the next level. And I don't think I would have been able to if I didn't participate in my senior year of basketball, because I didn't have a good junior year or a sophomore year. It was when I was a senior that I developed into a pretty good ball player and beyond. And all the great relationships, lifelong friends that I met in college because I went to that particular college, Suffolk University. So I can't even imagine what these kids are going through, and parents who are dealing with this. With that said, Mr. Boer, again, thank you, and if we can, any which way, live stream as many games as we can, whatever we need to do. If you could reach out to the superintendent's office, central office, they can get back to us and we can figure ways to get as many games on TV, on live stream as possible. I too believe parents should be there watching their kids, especially senior parents. If it comes down to maybe numbers, I would support senior parents having first priority over juniors, sophomores, and freshmen, depending on, because that, for many kids, this is their last year. They may not, more than likely, they may not play college ball. Some will, most won't. So if we can prioritize that, if we do have fans in the games, that's the way I would want to prioritize it. Of course, Ms. Cameron, our public health, she's just amazing, and I would want to get her opinions on this before we make any decisions as a body. Science has been right in this, and she's been a great asset to the city of Peabody. I think she's the best public health person on the North Shore at this point, and she's proven herself over and over. So I'd like to get her thoughts on this. The one question I have, Bob, is the Higgins gymnasium being used at all to maybe help with practice times and staggering practices? Maybe we can move some of the high school athletics here?
Yes, I do. That's part of my plan for practices, okay, is to have the Higgins as a facility use, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, again, thank you so much for all you're doing and keeping us updated. I'll yield, Mr. Hawker.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. And before we use your segue to Ms. Cameron, I do want to tell you that a mutual friend of mine and a former college teammate of yours, Paul Zermani, states to this day that one of the biggest oversights at Suffolk is not having Joe Miko in the Athletic Hall of Fame. With that, Ms. Cameron? Hi, Ms. Cameron. Welcome to our meeting. Okay. And thank you for being here tonight. I know you're extremely busy these days, and as Mr. Miko said, and I hope you heard, we all here at the school committee think you're doing a fantastic job keeping not only our students and staff safe, but our city as safe as possible. We see the numbers. We realize that there's an uptick, to state it mildly, in COVID-related cases. So we ask you here tonight to give us your insight and input and knowledge as far as athletics for the fall 2 season.
Sure. Well, thank you very much.
Excuse me, the winter season. I apologize, I misspoke. The winter season.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I've had a chance to meet with Bob Boer and his staff, and they shared their plans for modifications to the winter sports season to comply with the state and the MIAA protocols. And in my opinion, the plans that they've developed do comply with all the required protocols, and I have full confidence that the team at Peabody High School will implement those plans appropriately. The concerns that I have relate to the significant increase in community-wide transmission of COVID. This is happening throughout Massachusetts, but we're seeing really dramatic and concerning increases here in Peabody. In my role as public health director, my priority is to safeguard the health of all Peabody residents and to attempt to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic on our community. I also prioritize, as all of you do, taking whatever measures we can to ensure the ongoing success of our hybrid learning model. We all recognize the benefits of providing as much in-person learning as is safe and as possible for our students. I'm concerned that given the surge of cases at this point in time and the additional surge that we expect to see from holiday gatherings and travel, that moving forward right now to start high-risk extracurricular activities will increase the rates of transmission in our community and potentially jeopardize the hybrid learning model. So I wanted to share with you some data as well as some of the observations from the trends we've been seeing over the past several months. And this first slide shows the average, this is actually the number of new cases we've received every day in Peabody since the pandemic has started. And you can see back in April, we had our first surge. And now here in November, we're having our second surge of cases. So not only is the surge really high numbers, but the other piece that really impacts the community is back here in April, everything was shut down then. So all of these cases that we were seeing, they were really only affecting one or two other people, usually members of their same household. That's no longer the case. So here in November, when many sectors of our society are open, every single one of these cases has multiple contacts, whether it's in a work setting, a school setting, a social setting. It's not unusual at all for us to now seeing 10 or more close contacts for every single one of these cases. So the impact in our community is very different than what it was back in April. Could we have the next slide, please? There we go, thank you. So I know everybody has seen the risk map that the state puts out with the color codes. And as you all know, Peabody is now considered one of the highest risk communities. We've been in the red now for 3 weeks. This is one of the two metrics that the state uses to define who is a high risk community. This is the average new daily case rate per 100,000 residents. So last week, the last reporting period, Peabody's average new daily case rate was 58 new cases per 100,000 per day. I anticipate when this week's report comes out on Thursday that we will be at 85 average new daily case rates. And just for a little perspective, the cutoff that the state uses to define a high-risk category is 10. So we will be 8 times higher than that high-risk cutoff. And you can also see that the right side shows a similar trend in Massachusetts, but at much lower rates of increase. Can I have the next slide, please? The second metric that the state uses to characterize a community is the percent of lab tests that come back positive within the past 14 days. And again, you see the blue bars are Peabody and the orange is the statewide as a whole. So we're both trending up, but Peabody's rate of positivity is significantly higher and increasing at a faster rate. The cutoff that the state uses to define a high-risk community is 4%, and last week we were about 7%, and I expect that, I don't expect that we'll be trending in the right direction when they release this week's data report. Could I have the next slide, please? I also thought it was important to show Peabody is not unlike any other community in this state. This pandemic is really having disproportionate impacts on our communities of color and our immigrant populations. In Peabody, about 3.5% of our population is Black or African American, and about 10.5% is Hispanic. Yet 3.4% is Black, but they represent about 6% of our cases. And the Latino population represents about 13% of our cases. And people who speak Portuguese as a primary language represent about 17% of all cases here in Peabody. So I think it's really important as we evaluate policy decisions in our community that we do keep a mind on issues of health equity. Could I have the next slide, please? I wanted to just show you the trends in age groups. Over the months of the pandemic, the median age of cases here in Peabody has decreased. Back in April, the median age of our cases was about 62 years old. In November, it's about 42 years old. If you look back here in April, 2% of our cases were in the under 19 age group. By July, we're up to 5%, and now in November, we've at 12% of all of our cases in Peabody are among people under age 19. Can I have the next slide, please? So this data comes from our contact tracing efforts in the Peabody Public Schools. So I wanted to show you the blue bars represent people in isolation. And isolation means people who are actually sick with COVID themselves. They have the virus. Since we opened schools in September, we've had 20 staff and 105 students in isolation. The orange bars represent people in quarantine. And quarantine people means people who are not sick themselves, but they've been exposed to somebody with the virus. They're at risk of becoming sick themselves, and they're at risk of transmitting the virus to others. So they need to remain at home. So we've had 33 staff and 295 students who've had to quarantine over the past few months. The average number of close contacts we've had per student case is 2.4, but the range has been from 0 to 39 close contacts. The average number of close contacts per staff case is 4, but the range has been 0 to 26 close contacts. So when we look at the impact of COVID, we're not just looking at the numbers of people who are in isolation, but the much broader community of people who are also affected, and their ability to go to school and go to other events in their life is also impacted by their exposure to any case. The good news in all of this is that we are not seeing much evidence that transmission is happening in the school setting. We think that the strict protocols that are in place around spacing of desks, monitoring of social distancing, and mask use are really working well in the classrooms to prevent transmission. But we all recognize that it's not possible to achieve the same levels of compliance with those strict protocols when we're in an extracurricular setting. So you can see that the number of individuals who might lose their ability to attend school because of exposure to a case can be substantial. You have the next slide, please. This breaks down week by week what we've been seeing in terms of student cases, which are represented in blue, staff cases, which are represented in orange, and the quarantines of both staff and student are represented here in gray. So two pieces of information I wanted to just highlight from here is you can see for this last reporting period, which was not even a full reporting period, we had 30 students who needed to be isolated. It was double the number from the week before, basically. So that's a significant increase. The other piece of data that jumps out at us is that back here in mid-October, when we had 88 folks who needed to be quarantined, a significant proportion, 35 of these 88 people had to quarantine as a result of participation in 2 sporting events. There was one indoor event and one outdoor sporting event that resulted in 35 people needing to be quarantined. And it's important to remember that these are just the Peabody numbers. There were dozens more students on opposing teams who had to quarantine in their home communities as well. So again, you can see their potential for significant impact. Can I have the next slide, please? And then lastly, I wanted to show what we're seeing in terms of asymptomatic spread. This is data from our child cases. The slide on the left, we're still investigating some cases, but of the cases we've investigated, completed investigations, we have a significant proportion, about 28% of the cases where there are no symptoms. And then if you look at the right chart, it shows what type of symptoms. The people who do have symptoms, only 15% of people who have any symptoms have fever as a symptom. So I point that out because I know a lot of plans that we see, COVID compliance plans in businesses and other settings, they really rely a lot on the absence of fever as an indicator of safety. A lot of people feel that if they implement temperature checks at the entrance to an event or something like that, that really is a safeguard that can assure the safety. And we view it as a supplemental measure to enhance safety, but by no means is it sufficient to help us know that we've got a safe event, because so few of our cases actually have fever as a symptom. So the point of this slide is really just to show you that there's a significant amount of asymptomatic spread in our community, and that's contributing to our high rates of transmission. So that's all I have for data, but before I wrap it up, I just wanted to share a few other points that I think it's important for you to consider. The information that I just shared with you about case rates and contacts and cases, it comes from a season when moderate risk sports, and moderate risk is defined by the state as a moderate amount of direct physical contact between participants. So it was moderate risk sports being played outdoors. What we're talking about now are high risk sports, at least for two of them, basketball and hockey, and we're talking about playing them and practicing them indoors. So we think that this will significantly increase the risk over the numbers that we saw in the fall. The other thing I think it's important to remember is that the risks associated with sports programs is not limited strictly to the amount of physical contact between the participants. Our contact tracing over the fall has showed us that many cases we identified were associated with some of the informal social gatherings that go along with sporting events, things like parking lot gatherings, pasta parties, and the like, as well as with transportation issues associated with team travel. And then lastly, I thought it was important to let you know that the surge in cases that is being seen across the whole state has really compromised the efficacy of the contact tracing efforts that are so vital to preventing the spread of virus. In the past, contact tracing would be initiated within 24 hours, and people with exposure to the virus would be quickly identified and quarantined. Because of the current surge, delays in laboratory reporting and overwhelming case counts means that people with exposure are now routinely not being contacted for several days into their quarantine period. They remain out in the community longer before they even get the message that they need to quarantine, and this increases the risk of transmission for our entire community. We all recognize the substantial physical, social, and emotional benefits of having our students have access to their extracurricular activities. However, given the severity of the current situation in Peabody, my recommendation is to delay moving forward with the winter sports season until after the holidays, and to reevaluate based on the post-holiday data. I understand this is a challenging decision for your committee, and I pledge that no matter how you decide to proceed, the health department will work with you to ensure the safest protocols as possible are put into place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cameron. That was a tremendous amount of data that you provided to us and to our viewers. If we may, I would ask committee members if they had any questions for Ms. Cameron. Mr. Amico?
Thank you, through the chair. Ms. Cameron, thank you again for all you're doing. Have you gotten any indication from either Leahy Clinic in Peabody or Salem Hospital at what their numbers are looking like, their capacity, whether it's ICU or anything? How are those two hospitals doing right now during all this? I can't imagine, but just numbers wise.
Yeah, I don't have that information handy to give you. I do know there is some remaining capacity in the system right now, but obviously the governor is concerned about that capacity, and that was one of the reasons why he both opened up a field hospital in Worcester last week. There are other field hospitals they're looking at, and he, as you know, he did some significant rollbacks to businesses today. So it's certainly something people are concerned about, but I think at this point in time there is some residual capacity in our local system.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Ms. Cameron, if you'd be kind enough to stay with us for the duration of the meeting, we would appreciate it. There may be some other questions that come your way, and we shouldn't be too much longer.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Bua, if we can quickly go through the practice schedule.
Sure.
At our last regular school committee meeting, we had asked Dr. Vidala to convey to you a desire for practices to begin for winter sports, or non-season sports, excuse me.
Correct.
And he indicated that there was already some communication in place between yourself and a variety of coaches, where the coaches were going to present a safety plan and some other information to you. If you can just give us an update on that, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, no, the coaches that, for the upcoming fall 2 season, track and football and volleyball have submitted to me kind of a procedural kind of plan that they have in place. And like for the winter, I created a kind of a fall 2, what I'm calling preseason conditioning, because at this point, football and cheering are still considered high-risk sports and can only condition at this point. So, like for winter, I have the same kind of aspect. Some of the kind of the differences is kids that are not playing. If you're playing a winter sport, you should not be. You can't do a fall 2 conditioning. So if you're a football player and you're playing basketball, the football stuff, you're getting your conditioning by playing basketball. All right, so I think that needs to kind of be clear. Because again, the idea is to create cohorts. So when I've met with Coach Braz, and I've met with Coach Betancourt, and I've talked with Ms. Keene. But the idea is to create cohorts, especially trying to keep football and track outdoors as much as possible, because we can get away with more people outdoors than we can inside the field house. Right, so creating cohorts of 10, full cohorts of 10, and kind of giving, one cohort a day, another cohort a day, and then having them split some time on a weekend. So each team would get 3 days during the week, and volleyball would get 3 days here at the Higgins, and kind of allowing them to kind of work in their kind of their smaller cohorts. Indoors, we can't have more than 25 people with coaches in the building. So obviously, coaches would have to decide what cohorts are going to practice on the days if they have to go inside because of weather, or have to be inside for a long period of time because of weather. So I do have a practice plan in place that would allow 3 days a week for those teams.
Okay, thank you. And is that plan in place, ready to be implemented?
Yeah. So what I would, when I talk to the coaches, I would, if when we start, I would give them, allow the winter teams to get through their tryouts. So if a kid gets cut, they can then roll into these, because once the cohorts are created, those are the cohorts that are created. It's not one of those, I'm going to tell the coaches, we can't be taking a kid from one cohort and saying, well, he's going to serve better here. Once those cohorts are created, those 10 kids stay together, and they stay with that one coach, and they rotate around with that one coach in that aspect. Because the idea is, if a kid gets sick, because looking at the numbers, it's when a kid gets sick. We're quarantining 10 kids. We're not quarantining 40 kids or 60 kids, or on that end. So the idea is to try to keep the number of kids that are going to school in school for an extended period of time, and trying to keep those cohorts down.
Sure.
So that was kind of the plan behind that.
Okay, thank you. So if we can at this time, Dr. Lord, I don't know if we have 6 people, and if you wish to speak, we're going to open up a public participation now. Please raise your hand so Dr. Lord can recognize you. And Dr. Lord, if you want to bring one person in the room at a time.
There are 6 people. There are no raised hands at this time, but it might take a minute for it to populate onto the screen. B.L. Page. All right. B.L. Page, if you could unmute yourself and speak to the group, we're listening.
And Bob, if you can just start with your name and your address, we'd appreciate that.
Hello, this is Bob LePage, 7 Fitz Road here in Peabody.
How can we help you, sir?
I just wanted to, first of all, thank all the administrators involved, Mr. Bua, for putting a plan in place so that these kids can have a winter season. I know, I can imagine the amount of effort and some of the difficult decisions that you've had to make. And I'm sure the no spectator decision was not an easy one. I just would like to ask if you could, I know there are a number of other leagues, the Middlesex League and the Merrimack Valley League that have also, along with the NEC, are not allowing spectators. The Patriot League, towns in the South Shore like North Quincy, Brockton, Situate, Hingham, those towns, they, have come up with a plan that is going to allow for spectators to attend their games. I'm not sure if you can, if the NEC ADs can talk to those guys or talk to those towns about a plan that they have in place. They must feel that it's a good plan to allow for the logistical, movements in and out of these facilities, whether they're rinks or basketball courts. It's a tough one to swallow as the parent of a senior. It's just a tough one. So hoping that there's some room to take a look at this again and maybe talk to some of these other towns as to how they're going to approach things and approach things safely, because the state does allow for that provision. The EEA, everybody knows. I know it's going to be dialed back some, but still, these are big buildings. You would think that there could be a way, some solution to allow some spectators to attend these games.
Thank you, Mr.
So
LePage.
that's my question. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LePage. Still 5 people, no one else has their hands raised, sir.
We'll continue with the meeting. If anyone else wishes to speak, we do have about 13 minutes left. If anyone wishes to speak, please raise your hand. Dr. Lord will monitor the participants in the waiting area. Ms. Carpenter?
Just a question to Bob LePage's comments to Dr. Bua. The no spectators, is that, did all of the ADs agree to that? Is that?
So what we agreed upon as ADs is no outside, no like home fans only at your event. So again, we as PBD parents, we couldn't go to Beverly to watch a game. We couldn't go to Danvers, Swampscott, wherever to kind of watch a game. The rink, the YMCA and Yellow Jackets, that's their policies at the moment, is to have no fans into their facilities. Partially talking to the rink because they are not using locker rooms. In a sense, when you have, back-to-back games, teams would be finishing up on one side of the ice, other teams would be coming in, and it's just a matter of the safety for the athletes that are involved. It's kind of a big majority of that. So the game before they're coming in, they need a place where they can go and they can get ready for their game, and then other teams would leave out the backside and then kind of rotate through. So the aspect of being able to do that safely was a lot of their decision on not allowing in fans.
Yeah, and I do respect that, and I do think it's something that we really should tease out a little bit more. I do respect your thought process on maybe, giving it a week or two and we can revisit it. I will say, from my own personal experience, as a mother of a few athletes, and these organizations and these sports have been playing, as you all know, all along in some other form or fashion, not in school. And I will tell you that the rinks and the courts and the gyms have figured it out. They do have a process. And, there's the kids that are getting dressed in the freezing cold outside before a hockey game, basketball, they're getting, changed in by their trunk. Some of the rinks are allowing 2 parents, and it definitely depends on the size of the building, and they have them taped off. It's definitely happening, and it does work, but I do respect the position that we're in right now, and if the board, that's the way that we're going to go, I would definitely want to revisit it, after a week or two, because I just feel, just from my own experience, that it can be done, just because I'm doing it right now.
And I don't disagree with that statement. I also look at it as being indoors as compared to being outdoors as just an extra element of risk factor, I think, with all of this. And my my biggest concern right now is to make sure we are creating a safe environment for the student athletes.
Absolutely,
And
I
that's-
agree, yep.
And I get it. Again, I'm a parent. I go to all my kids, I just dropped off my daughter at a soccer game and she's getting a ride home from somebody else because I'm here and my wife is someplace. So I get that aspect of it as a parent. But I pull my parents' hat off and I look at it from a point of view of how can we kind of safely make sure that these student athletes get the best experience, get their season in, and then we can talk about kind of spectators coming in afterwards. Because I look at it, the spectators are for the parents, the games are for the kids. It's about the kids, and it's about creating that environment and atmosphere for the parents. And again, I'm open to, if we get through the first couple of weeks and things are going great, to have that discussion and kind of look at things. And I don't want to be the person who says, oh, it's your daughter's senior year, too bad. Like, I understand that. I'm human. Like, I get that element
No,
as
we
well,
all get it.
right?
Right.
And again, I would look at something to do like we did in the fall and try to find some way to honor the seniors and the parents and try to make something work along those lines. And, but I just see right now trying to get this up and running and try to get it up and running as safe as possible. Not having parents in to start, I think, is probably the safest way for all the kids. And just, I think just kind of logistically, I think it would be, kind of the safest aspect. And again, it could go a couple weeks and I could be completely wrong and it could be completely fine, and then we have that discussion.
I just want to say, I don't think you're wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not saying you're
Yeah,
wrong at
no,
all.
no,
Nope. And I agree with you, and I totally get it. And I just want to say, let's keep working at it.
Yes.
Because I do know that it is working in other places, and I respect your position, I understand it, and I'm just trying to find a way, at least for the senior parents, to get in there, that's all. So,
Yeah.
you're not wrong.
No, and the difference between looking at a Danvers Indoor Sports or a sports complex, and those are private operations. So I think as a public operation, I think our kind of our allegiances are more to our client, which are our kids, and I
Yep.
think that's as compared to these other places where they're about renting off their fields and renting off their spaces and everything else. So,
Yeah. But we can definitely learn something from them. I will tell you that they've been running some of the places that I've been very well. So,
Yeah.
that's all,
No,
just that point.
Yes,
Thank you, Bob.
understood.
Yeah.
Mr. Bowe, we do have a few minutes left, and I know Mr. Miko has another comment or question, but before we get to Mr. Miko, if you will, you mentioned that we use 3 outside facilities for winter sports. We use Yellow Jackets for gymnastics, we use the YMCA for swimming and diving, and we use the McVan ice rink for boys and girls ice hockey.
Correct.
Okay, and is it fair to say or safe to say that all 3 of those facilities have put safety plans in place for their boards of health that have been approved, and that they're operating, in compliance with the regulations and state protocols?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
And before I go to Mr. Miko with one last thing from me, for now, with the additional difficulties that indoor sports, which are all winter sports or indoors, places on the protocols and procedures that you identified earlier in this meeting, are we doing anything in terms of, at least in our buildings, not in those other 3 facilities, but in our buildings, doing anything to increase ventilation? Are doors going to be open at the field house during competition or during practices?
Yeah, so that's something that I did, when I did meet with Sharon, we did talk about. So there are ways, again, a lot of it depends on weather, and kind of what's happening outside. But yeah, I mean, we can kind of prop open doors, and part of is, when a kid does come off the court, part of having the setup in the field house is a kid can go over, pop open the door, pull their mask down, get that fresh air before having to kind of come back inside. And, there are ways to kind of look at that, especially for practices, opening the doors or opening the garage door on nice days and kind of let that air in and stuff like that. It becomes a little bit tighter with game and stuff like that, just with what doors get opened and how that would affect, the play, so.
Sure, okay. Thank you. Mr. Miko?
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins, through the chair, Bob, thank you, and Ms. Carpenter, thank you. I think you both are both right and you're both wrong, because this is 2020, and no one has been more wrong about this whole thing than me.
Did you say I'm wrong?
No. But I'm more wrong.
Ms. Carpenter, boxing is a summer sport that's not on the agenda for tonight.
Because I was one who was opposed to even opening way back when, and I think as we've seen, schools aren't really spreaders, it's the outside coming in. So here's what I'd like to propose. I'd like to propose that we listen to the recommendations of Ms. Cameron in regards to start dates, but I also think that we should really strongly consider having parents of seniors at the athletic games, even if it's one per senior. I'm thinking about basketball hypothetically. If you have 4 or 5 seniors on that team, that's 4 or 5 parents. I think we could safely distribute over the whole field house 4 or 5 parents. As Ms. Carpenter says, it is happening in other places, in other venues. Now, we can't tell the private venues what to do, but we do control what happens in our schools, I believe, as a body. And I do think, using that theme of senior student athletes, it's their time, it's their parents' time. So I'm looking at a compromise. Let's shut down the fans for games except for 1 parent per senior. I think that's a fair compromise. It still allows your freshmen, sophomore, juniors next year, the year after, and their parents to watch them play in person. But schools are still opening. We're not shutting down schools. If we can safely move students in and around the high school, 700, 800 of them at a time, I think we can have 4 or 5 parents at either sides of the gymnasiums watching their kids from 150 feet away. That's something I can't get over. If we're gonna keep buildings open, we gotta have a little bit of compromise on the athletics, just a little bit to help those senior parents. I'll yield.
No, Mr. Amico, thank you for those points, and I'm going to ask if we could take them up independently, and if you would like to we'll talk about parent access to sporting events first. If you want to make a motion, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Did you, on the dates or?
No, just on the parents' ability to spectate.
Sure, I'd like to make a motion to allow 1 parent of each senior participating at a varsity sport to attend that particular game.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Amico, seconded by Ms. Carpenter. Mr. Bull, we usually don't go back to non-committee members, but out of deference to you and respect for your position and the difficulties of this subject matter, Mr. Bull.
I would just like to add this, that would be at the high school, correct? Not, I just don't want, I want to make that clear that we have no control over what outside venues do. So I just want to make sure that that's clear on that.
I can amend that motion as for any facility that we, as a school, run. So that would be the high school.
Thank you for the amendment, Mr. Amico. I'm assuming Ms. Carpenter
Yes.
seconds the amendment.
Yep, that's
Any
fine.
discussion on this? Mr. Amico.
And the reason why I say that is, again, we can't control policies in other buildings. I don't know what their policy at Yellow Gymnastics is, Yellow Jackets, I believe. I don't know what the policy is at the skating rink or other facilities, but I do know that we can set policy in our building, and I think it's safe to say that we can distribute 4 or 5 parents safely in that building.
On the motion, I'm going to speak, and I agree with Mr. Amico that we have control over what we have control over, and that's where we can set policy. I would ask that Mr. Bua have a conversation with the 3 outside facilities. If you have already, if you can revisit it based upon this is just a subcommittee vote. We'll take up a full committee vote at the end of, towards the end of our regular school committee meeting later on tonight. But if the regular school committee votes in favor of this motion, I would ask that you have conversations with the outside facilities and the school committee, if that's the way the vote goes, would strongly appreciate the ability for limited parent spectating for those seniors. So On the, Mr. Miko, on the motion?
I had one more item on that. I would like to set up some kind of a, whether it's through our athletic department or in conjunction with our public health department, to have a Zoom call with the senior parents who will be attending those events to go over strict policies and have a zero tolerance policy to be addressed during that time. Thank you.
Mr. Miko's motion is further amended. Ms. Carpenter?
Yep.
Seconds. Seeing no further discussion, roll call vote. Mr. Miko?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, so it will be the recommendation of this subcommittee to the committee of the whole to allow senior parents, one senior parent per student athlete to attend sporting events held at Peabody Public School facilities. On the second matter, which I think Ms. Cameron raised about the delay in the start of winter sports, do either of you wish to make a motion in that regard? Mr. Miko?
I will. And the reason why I'll make this motion is, this is all about, giving a little to get a little, give a lot to get a lot. And I think we're in dire straits right now. If we don't have compromises right now, things are gonna get really bad, and we're gonna shut down, and we're gonna be back where we were last March or April. That's my fear. I hate doing this, I'll be honest with you. I hate doing this, I hate moving this. I think we have a duty to not only our students and staff, but we have a duty to the whole community, as Ms. Cameron said. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to move the start date to January 4th for athletics.
Motion made by Mr. Amico. Is there a second? Mr. Amico, there is no second to your motion, so your motion will fail.
That's fine.
Do I have any other motions?
I have discussion.
Ms. Carpenter?
Thank you through the chair to Mr. Bua. In regards to the recommendation of Ms. Cameron, the health department, for the delay of the winter sports season, is that something you already talked about with her?
Yeah, it's been brought to my attention, yes.
Are any of our other schools that we're scheduled to compete with delaying their season?
At the moment, not that I'm aware of. I know there are, I know some schools I've reached out to that are preparing to start on Monday, and some schools are waiting still approval of their Board of Health. And I know the Lynn schools have opted not to play. And I know that there are a few communities, and I don't want to name them publicly, that are having similar discussions that we are having, but nothing has been finalized at the moment.
And with that delay, it would be, what would that be, a 3-week delay?
So you have 2 weeks
2 week
from
delay?
when you start before you can play your first game.
And when are our first games scheduled for?
As of right now, they're scheduled to start on the 8th and 9th of January.
And if we delay 2 weeks, are we supposed to have at least 2 weeks of practice before
Correct.
the first game?
Correct, yes.
So that would push us back
Yeah, you're probably looking at anywhere from 2, 3, or 4 games, depending on what it is, to have to reschedule.
Okay, I just wanted to double check.
Per sport, by the way, except for swimming and gymnastics, so they only go once a week.
Okay, but currently, nobody else has delayed their season?
Not that I'm aware of within the Northeastern Conference.
Okay, all right, thank you. So,
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Before I go back to Mr. Amico, Dr. Lord? Mr. Amico?
Sure. Again, reluctantly, I make that motion and I talk about that delay to January 4th. I believe Salem is doing it, one of our neighbors. And again, I'm just very concerned about the numbers spiking up after the holiday and us potentially not having anything, you know, and not having a season. And that's a possibility. And I just think our parents and our kids our athletes have been so patient, and it isn't fair to them. It really isn't. But it's a gamble. If we continue as is, we may not have something in the spring to look forward to.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Amico. This is not an easy subject. I mean, we're dealing with safety of human beings, not just young human beings, but their adult coaches and teachers and family members and a bunch of other stuff. We all recognize the importance and the significance of athletics on human beings generally, specifically high school students who, as Mr. Amico said earlier in the meeting, may not have the opportunity to play competitively beyond their high school years. My concern with Ms. Cameron's recommendation, and all due respect to Ms. Cameron, I've praised her for many years, but publicly for the better part of this year, for all the work that she's done, and it is appreciated. But my concern with the delay is that we have the Fall 2 schedule already in place. And the Fall 2 schedule is a very, very tight window, starting at the end of February or beginning of March and running through some point in April. And spring sports are already pushed back to begin at the end of April and run through, I think, the beginning of July, after school's even out. Well, I appreciate Mr. Amico's remarks as well, and the risk we run with losing a season completely. 2 weeks out of a 6 week schedule, which is really all this winter winter sport participation is extremely significant. So it's really for those reasons that I would prefer to see us begin the winter season as is currently scheduled. And that being said, one area that we do have some luxury is we have another school committee meeting before games are expected to play. And we have the ability to relook at this. But if we don't go forward, practices don't begin, and then we lose the opportunity to participate. So I'm hoping at this point that either one of you is going to take the chair so I can make a motion, or Ms. Carpenter is able to make a motion that I can second. But before we do that, I see he looks like the Dark Knight has just come into our meeting. Dr. Vidala, welcome to our meeting. I know that you were participating in a special education subcommittee meeting earlier. We appreciate you joining us now and giving us some insight.
Thank you. Just hearing this lively discussion, I just wanted to just make a brief comment about starting of practice times and starting of games in relation to one another, just for clarity. So right now, the first game possible that is scheduled in the Northeast Conference is for the 9th of January. So that hasn't changed. In order to participate in that game, you need to start practices 2 weeks prior to it, which I believe would be sometime the week of December 28th, 9th, 30th-ish, that week. So we do have a school committee meeting on the 22nd, which would allow time to start following that. If you started on the 14th, the cat's out of the bag at that point, and you would be starting prior to our next school committee meeting. So I don't know I wasn't here for the whole conversation, but I don't know if there's any happy medium with what the discussion was. I do know that we have consistently said that we try to follow the direction of the Public Health Department, and sometimes that has to be when we don't always agree with that, or we wish that we could do something else. So I don't know if there's any opportunity for us to find some sort of common ground or consensus. I do know that Mr. Boo and I have talked at length about the opportunity to participate in games contingent upon 2 weeks of practices. So if we back off from the start date of a game, whether that's the 13th or the 9th or whatever that may be, a start date 2 weeks prior to that would still allow us to participate in games. So if I don't know if that changes what your thought process was. I know we're going to have a further discussion at the full school committee meeting. I just wanted to put that out there, that we only need to start practicing 2 weeks prior to the first game.
Dr. Lord, before we go on with this conversation, are there any other participants with their hands raised? Okay.
Would you like me to take the chair, Mr. Hockman?
Sure. Mr. Miko, would you like to?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, you may speak.
So what Dr. Vidala says,
I didn't say you were wrong, by the way.
what Dr. Vidala says does make a lot of sense. As we've become accustomed to already in his brief tenure here. If we can push this matter over to our December 22nd meeting and not necessarily interrupt scheduled play. So I'm inclined to when Mr. Miko continues to talk about compromise, I think it's his word of the night. I'm inclined to accept that by way of compromise, so long as it doesn't impact the ability to participate. And that's what I'm hearing from Dr. Vidala, and I think Mr. Bua is that?
Yes, correct. You have to have 2 weeks prior to your first contest.
All right, and before I make this, if I can ask Mr. Bua, and I realize, well, have you had that conversation with coaches, or what are the coaches' positions with regard to beginning of practice for winter sports?
I have not had the conversation with the coaches. I was waiting for the outcome of today's meeting.
Okay.
I'm planning on meeting with my staff tomorrow, and part of it is to discuss the recommendations or the what comes out of this meeting today.
Okay.
I will tell you this: coaches are ready to go. Coaches are ready to go come the very first day of anything. My basketball coach is ready to go November 30th, right? So I mean, they're on that end. I mean, I know just looking paperwork wise and logistics wise, the number of kids that we have that sign up every year, we're not even close to those numbers.
Yeah.
The number of kids who've turned in physicals, the number of kids who have done a lot of the paperwork stuff has not fully been. Has been done. So if we do start Monday, there's a lot of kids who aren't going to be able to participate that probably want to.
Okay. I'm doing a horrible job at managing this meeting, particularly in terms of time. So
Yeah, get off the chair right now.
Yeah,
But-
so let me take over.
I think Ms. Carpenter, who is the chair, wishes to speak. So Ms. Carpenter.
Just to that point, I kind of feel where this might be going, but my thought is, in the words of compromise, by possibly pushing it to our next school committee meeting, but still yet making the 2-week cutoff, why wouldn't we just move forward and let it start on the 14th, make that week a non-contact practice week, and then figure out where we are?
So you're talking about a conditioning type?
Yes, and then they'd still have the time if we're gonna start on time.
Just on that, because of the number of kids that we are allowed to have in the field house, not having those first 3 days of tryouts and having that organized within cohorts of 15 to 20 kids to make it manageable to meet the guidelines, because we can't have 80 kids in the field house trying out for basketball. All right, so that just the guidelines don't allow that to happen. So if we're gonna create that week in which non-contact practices, who's allowed to attend? Right, because then you have kids some kids are going to be able to attend, some kids who aren't, and then you go to make tryouts, and it's like, well, they've been running for a week, and I just think that creates kind of a logistical nightmare. I just think in the sense of who gets to participate, who doesn't get to participate, because now you're looking at, we have to have a limited number of cohorts to begin tryouts anyways, and I think it would just kind of, now we're saying we're having these optional practices, and then out of the 22 kids, how do you pick the 22 kids?
Which you would have to do anyways on the 21st, 22nd, right?
For tryouts.
Yeah.
And that's because we'd have kids that are signed up and ready to go, but then we'd be creating cohorts and eventually cutting kids down to a team of 12 to 15 kids, not 30 to 40, 50 kids, whatever it might be.
I just, yeah, I'm just not there right now. I'm sorry. I just don't see it. I don't know what's gonna happen with the other, I don't know how they're gonna accommodate our schedules. Will we miss games because of it? Is it an actual concern? Mr. Hockman?
I make a motion that winter athletics tryouts practices begin December 14th, 2020. You can second from
Yeah. So we'll bring that to the.
roll call. Mr. Amico?
No.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Mr. Bua, Ms. Cameron, obviously that was a difficult decision that we just made, and it's no disrespect to you. We appreciate your hard work. I can tell you that this committee struggles every single day with some of the decisions that we make. This will be one of them. We try to do our best for our students, our faculty, our staff, our administrators, and the city in general. I'll leave it at that, I guess, okay? I appreciate your time tonight. You provided us with an hour and 15 minutes. I know it's valuable time, so I appreciate you giving us the insight that you have. This will be further discussed at our school committee meeting that will immediately follow this subcommittee meeting. These are merely recommendations coming out of the subcommittee.
Permission to speak?
Mr. Boer?
I'd like to thank Sharon Cameron. We met with my staff, Ms. Strange, Kathy Strange, Dennis Gruby, my athletic trainer, Mr. Magno. We're all kind of met with Sharon last week and had a very productive meeting. But again, I'd like to publicly thank her as well as my staff for the work that they did, making sure we can get this up and running in a safe way.
Thank you, Mr. Boer, and your staff is doing a phenomenal job. You did a phenomenal job with Fall 1 sports. We appreciate that. There were a couple of hiccups along the way, but for the most part, I believe athletics were extremely successful, both in terms of being able to participate and the level of enjoyment. We saw that in celebrating 7 student athletes that signed on with commitments to play at the next level. I believe since that commitment day, we've had at least 2 more student athletes who have committed to play college sports, and we're always happy to see our student athletes succeed and take it to the next level. So thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at this point.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you all very much.